be. Just be here, yeah. So again, we have Melissa Saffron and Michelle McCarty. They're both end-of-life doulas and occupational therapists. And their organization, their business, their thing is called Solace and Sage, and it helps with people aging at home, right? So aging in place. So again, we are not the experts, so we're all going to look at you, and you're going to help us discuss this theme.
Okay, great. We're excited to be here. We kind of divided our conversations and discussions into 3 parts. The first part will discuss the nursing home scene and everything that was going on in the nursing home scene. And then we'll discuss Howard receiving his diagnosis and go from there. And then the last part, we'll discuss the scene in the kitchen where he's talking about his end of life wishes. Okay. So we want to kind of start things off by asking, does anybody want to share or comment on what emotions do you think Dolores, Howard, and Tamika were experiencing at that nursing home scene? Kind of emotions we're kind of going through. And all of them, experiencing different ones, some of them experiencing the same emotions. But does anything pop out that you think they were experiencing?
I have ideas.
Please share.
So did Dolores, the fear, this is what, not knowing nursing homes and not knowing what to expect and losing your autonomy and all of the things that come with it. So Dolores, fear and denial, right? Scared, yeah. Scared, apprehensive.
Just that overall feeling of a loss of control.
I was just gonna say that just from doing it, it came to me that he's wanting to control her and her feelings and to control what he's doing. Like he's kind of stuck in the middle, and which is kind of a life thing. We're all doing that in some respect, yeah.
Anything else?
Frustration. The person going off shift that's trying to help, but it's really just, not listening to what she's saying and not helping in a helpful way. So just frustrated that people not paying attention.
Not feeling heard.
Loss of dignity.
Yeah, that scene where there's, assuming that she couldn't get the door open because something, she was not capable of something when in fact her husband, who doesn't have any cognitive, he couldn't get the door open. So there was that loss, some dignity there.
Trying to balance what you think you want for yourself versus what other loved ones want for you. How do you wrestle with that? How do you, make them feel happy and peaceful, but it's still your life. So the daughter seems to have an agenda, wants her parents to be well taken care of, but they seem to have their own ideas of what they want to do.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, everybody does come with their own agenda, and their own perspective on how this needs to be handled. And what was lacking throughout all of this was just even a basic conversation about what do you want?
Yeah.
Right.
I mean, in the beginning, Dolores says they're just going because it's an opportunity for her to see.
And that's
That is nobody's sad. Not on the same page at all. So it's just, everybody has a different.
It's very sad.
It's sad. Oh, sad. Absolutely. Also like a loss of identity. I mean, she had mentioned that she was this professor, Shakespearean professor, and it's like, and now she's not remembering. So, I mean, this loss of identity possibly that they were feeling. Has anyone heard of the term anticipatory grief? Has anyone heard of that term?
Sure, yeah.
Yeah. Not sure what that is, like what that.
Well, the way I understand it is it's you're trying to prepare yourself for whatever that wave of emotion is going to be by getting into it early before the person is actually gone.
She calls her every day, so that routine is changing. I'm sure as a couple, Dolores and Howard have lots of routines that will be impacted by all this change.
That bring quality of life. I mean,
right.
Your routines, you have purpose and meaning and that's how you kind of make sense of your day. And so if those are uprooted, then you feel very, very sad.
Perhaps it was like an unfiltered picture of what a future could look like that wasn't, like sugar coated, that and maybe they weren't really ready to deal with that.
Right.
Yeah. And then to add, like flipping the roles, like that picture they used to see was mom's mom, and daughter's daughter, and now it's like these roles are reversing, and you don't have a clear picture of that because that's new. It's a new role that she's taking on, and so Dolores is kind of losing her autonomy and freedom. So that has a powerful impact and some change there with all of this.
You touched a little bit just kind of on those assumptions that people have about going into a nursing home. What thoughts do y'all have or things that you've heard about, as far as being in a nursing home, and good or bad? Anything?
What's
You're
the
laughing.
difference between nursing home, assisted living, and all the options?
That's our next question.
That's a good
actually.
question.
It's awesome.
So there are a lot of different options, and there are many agencies out there that can actually meet with you and go through that. And there's placement agencies, and they don't charge. And so if you're ever in a space where you're trying to figure out individually, like what's it going to cost, and what are the benefits, and you want to bring a pet, just know that you can get connected, and there are services out there. And you don't have to just take that first step of just going on and doing tours, because that is overwhelming. There's even in the Austin area and across the nation, there's life plan communities, which, you buy in and you're there for an extended period of time, and they service your needs, and they all have different ranges as far as, the cost. There's independent living, which is more towards somebody that's, 65 or older, and it's more of an apartment, but they do offer meals, and there's services. There's assisted living, where you actually have a nurse that's available. You can have medication assistance. You can have, a caregiver that's coming and providing bathing assistance. And then the independent living, there are a lot of residents that would get actually paid, would pay to have those persons come in. I think specific to this type of episode, they're talking about memory care, because she does have the diagnosis that runs in her family. And so memory care, the concept of assisted living, where you have a nurse come and you're pretty independent in your apartment and you can come and go, there are just locked memory care assisted living units. So the front door is locked, and everybody in there is receiving care and has a diagnosis. And so it's a community that is freely open, and everybody comes and goes on the inside, but it is a locked, controlled, safe environment.
So, assisted livings also have, sorry to interrupt, they have like tiers depending on what your needs are. If you just need someone to organize your medications, that's something you're struggling with. You could just pay for that service. If you need someone to help assist with bathing, you can pay for that, or your laundry. So it all depends on where your level is. So you can stay, transition from independent to assisted, just because you don't want to have to shop and do all that meal prepping. And then you can stay for an extended amount of time as things progress and change medically, because you can have all these levels of assistance. So you don't have to just make this huge change into a memory unit, or a long-term care facility where they're taking care of all your needs, and you're just paying for that. Everyone's paying for the same thing across the board in a long-term care facility.
Assisted living in Texas is primarily a private pay facility. And then when you hear long-term care is the same thing as a nursing home, that's considered. And within the long-term care, there can be locked memory units. So if somebody in a long-term care bed can be private pay or Medicare, Medicaid funded. And so there can be locked units in the long-term care, or there can be a locked full long-term care facility. And usually within a long-term care facility, there is something called skilled nursing. And so if you've had, a surgery or knee replacement or something, and you need to go for rehab for a little bit, you can be in that long-term care for a set amount, and then you would return home after that.
in some ways, so Dolores and Howard are lucky because they actually have this option. And when I think we think about our future, we're like, I don't think that's an option for us because it's cost prohibitive, and I don't even know if they're going to exist in the same way in the future. So when I think of nursing homes, I'm like, is there even going to be a place where we can be cared for in our older age? Yeah, but their situation is privileged.
Right.
Like they're privileged that they get to even consider this, and so many of us can't even consider it, right?
And that's what really inspired Michelle and I to start the nonprofit Solace and Sage, where we focus on services to help older adults remain at home and age in place throughout their lifespan, and connect you to community resources and services, and put systems in place, and offer therapy in the home, and help with consulting to have your plan. Because you're right, Auntie, there isn't going to be enough facilities to meet the needs of this fast, rapid growing older population. It's just, it's not available. And the medical staff isn't available as well as we keep building more and more facilities.
Well, and when we look at caring for somebody and helping somebody age in place, there's a whole person approach to that. And there's meeting your personal needs, your medical needs, and your environmental needs. And so, placement in a nursing home or memory care unit, the focus is on, I've just got to get you in an environment where you can be safe. And then obviously they do provide medical care in there, but I think that's kind of the point of this podcast series, is that we have to have conversations and we have to meet all those needs, your personal needs, your medical needs, and your environmental needs. And so when you're just focusing on the environment and placement, that's where there's that disconnect. And she's like, wait, I don't personally want to go there. And Tamika's concerned, well, I don't know how I'm going to meet your medical needs or your, all of your needs. And so that's, kind of where this disconnect lies.
It seems like the distinction is where these services are provided.
Yes.
That if it's in-home based, then you're managing a network of people who will come to provide these services to this place where you're familiar with what's going on. What's curious is how we're going to handle this locked environment that we need as we get to the point where losing your way in your neighborhood is a danger. But maybe we'll wear devices or something.
Right.
Like when I forget where my phone is, I tap my watch. And if we had something that clever,
Yeah.
probably wouldn't get lost. Or we'd have a dog that would know the way home.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Our next question is, does anyone want to comment on how family dynamics come into play with this type of situation? And how does it impact these family dynamics? I mean, it's hard enough to manage and navigate your end of life plan and decisions, but having to manage and navigate these family dynamics that were always there, maybe even before this, and then also family dynamics that come into play because of what's going on. Anyone want to comment on Dolores and Howard? And
I can comment on that too. So I can because my parents aren't here this week. They'll be here next week.
yeah, they can take
Yeah, they are, they're lucky enough that they were able to, look at different life plan communities. But three of their kids' families are in Austin. They're in San Antonio. Or they picked a place in San Antonio. And we were like, why are you not coming here? Like, come here where we can be down the street. And they're like, our friends are here, our doctors are here. We don't want to come there. We don't want to be a burden. We don't, no. You'll hear this in Dolores, of course. So the frustration of that, you could be here, we could be closer, and you are choosing not to. And then a little bit, not betrayal, but not disgust, anger, frustration, because you're like, oh, you think you don't love us enough to be close. Like, why can't you be closer to us? So I think those intergenerational dynamics are so hard because you do. I was like, we have to honor what they want, and my brothers are like, why are they living there? Don't they want to just come here? No, we have to honor what they want. And it's better for them because they are with their doctors and their friends. They could just be 10 minutes down the road. It would be better for me. Maybe that's the problem. What's better for me versus what's better for
But they
them.
have always been there in San Antonio.
Well, recently, because we were in
Oh.
Corpus Christi originally and then kind of all over, but yeah. But they've been there for like 20 years, 25, 4. How many years have we been married?
So,
Now you're on the spot.
I don't even remember.
no,
No, they've been there a while.
Yeah.
Yeah, a while. We've been married a while.
27 years. 98, 98.
Done? He's on record saying.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, that's a lot of change. I think they were trying to minimize the
Yeah,
change.
like you said,
Minimize that impact.
the routine is in
Absolutely. I mean, and like you were saying, everybody has the best intentions. Everybody's putting in, their recommendations and giving suggestions, and everybody has the best intentions. But even with the best intentions, why doesn't it feel like that to Dolores?
Oh, she's totally scared. She doesn't have all the options that you point out. She doesn't. They assume she needs the memory care unit. That'll separate her from the husband. She thrives with her husband, even his little humor. You know?
It stressed me out now.
so scared for her. Yeah.
It also seems no one asked her.
Right.
No one had the conversation with her about anything.
No, they just completely jumped into action.
And that's it. Michelle mentioned earlier that we take this three-pronged approach, with our services. That we focus on your personal, your medical, and your environmental needs. And that personal aspect was, they weren't finding out what her needs were. What was she thinking about this? What was she feeling? And what does she want to do? And, a lot of times that's how we adapt to change. We're either denying, avoiding, or resisting, or we just jump into action and we think that as long as we're doing something, it's got to be right. And it's just, if we're not mentally, emotionally, and physically all on board, it doesn't necessarily mean what we're doing is aligning. Not every solution we jump into is going to be the best fit and that best solution.
Right, and they were just really focused, she was focused on trying to solve a problem, that it was creating more problems because they hadn't taken the time to find out what is important for Dolores. What do you even want? And I get it. I mean, I have aging parents and I'm in the middle and I have younger kids and I'm trying to manage, Mom, hurry up, we gotta move forward with this. I mean, I am that daughter sometimes, I get it because I'm behind and I've got, dinner that needs to be made. But yet I understand that, I have to stop and at least take time to find out what's important to her outside of a call while I'm trying to cook dinner and do other things, and it's about, and I think as we go along in the next couple of weeks, it's about just making sure that moment to find out what matters and have those conversations is something that's really needs to be scheduled in a priority and not just something kind of off, on the fly.
in between.
Well, with her being female, most people don't ask a female what she was interested
Absolutely.
in, what she wants.
And Howard's just trying to fix it and solve it and be responsible and take care of things.
Plus, there's the luxury of, even if you don't agree with your kids, that you have kids.
Yeah.
They care. There's lots of couples that are aging that don't have children, don't have
Yeah.
grandchildren. Didn't think to save for long-term care. What are their options? Where they have to figure out financially, how do they go forward? That to me seems even worse and scarier.
Right.
So, thinking about this sort of having done this with my parents, and then sort of kind of occurring to me that then I'm the shoes on the other foot. But I could see in the case of parents, and the dynamics do change. Where parents they were the decision makers for, while you were a kid, then you become that. But they're dependent and will do I think it would have been hard to have that conversation about what is it that you want I think they're, in my case, they trusted me to have the right decision, and that's a big responsibility.
Oh, yeah.
And,
Well, I think as a mom, you know, when my kids ask me what I want, I'm like, well, what do you want? You know, it's just, because it's never about us. And so to have to sit and think about, no, really, what do I want, even though I know it's going to be stressful for you and cause you to drive further. That's not a natural thing.
so they could see where your support, a third party support would really help in this.
Right.
Because it's impossible in the moment to have that kind of clarity,
Right.
I think.
And then, you know, jumping into action, you know, without thinking about, you know, am I mentally adapting? Am I emotionally adapting to this? Am I really on board? You know, that's when people start to feel like, you know, they think I'm losing my independence. And that feeling is definitely understandable, but not for the reasons we think. It's, you know, they think they're losing their independence because they're relying on people. They're relying on something outside of themselves. But we all rely on something outside of ourselves. We're all relying on systems to get through the day at any age. You know, none of us are truly independent. You know, that word originated from talking about land and being sovereign and, you know, separating from other lands. It wasn't about personal independence. And so what they're experiencing, that sense of, you know, losing that independence, they're really losing that sense of control. They're losing their sense of well-being, and they're losing that sense of competence. You know, am I going to be competent? And those are really what independence is really about. So it's not about trying to come in and, you know, people think I want to regain my independence. They think they need to, you know, solve being able to do it on my own. Let me make this decision on my own. But really it's about finding ways to restore and regain that sense of control, that sense of well-being, and that sense of competence again. And so, you know, that's the focus, is helping people maintain that, and we equate that with quality of life. So when we say, you know, independence and quality of life go hand in hand, we don't mean the more you can do something alone and quality of life goes hand in hand. We mean that sense of having that sense of control, well-being, feeling competent goes hand in hand. So definitely think, even though everyone's having the best intentions, it doesn't feel that way, because those are the things that are really being impacted for, you know, it's just not having them.
Well, and I think as you said earlier, like, she just didn't even have the option. She didn't know, you know, and that's kind of that first step in gaining a sense of control, is just understanding and getting clarity on what is this all about, you know, and what's happening. And I mean, I'll just move us into Howard and his diagnosis. You know, that was a prime example of poor bedside manner, but also, you know, just, and then again, this is a doctor, so, you know, this was not great news, but not completely unexpected, it sounded like. And just having no idea what's next. And, you know, talk about what bedside manner, I mean, that really is impactful. I mean, that completely tanked that entire visit. I mean, I'm sure you all have had experiences where you have been in doctor's visits and thought, I can't wait to get out of here. And that to me was what that was like. I mean, it was laughable, literally.
You know, and now Howard is feeling everything Dolores was just feeling, you know, and Howard's jumping into action. Immediately he's like, nope, don't want to hear any treatments, don't want to, you know. And I thought it was really fascinating when Dolores was really quick to advocate for Howard's decision to leave, and she said, can you give us more time? He needs more time to absorb this. But she wasn't able to say that to her daughter about herself. And so that's that family dynamics. You know, she didn't have that going on with the physician. So she could just say to the physician, listen, we need some more time to absorb this. You know, so I just thought it's interesting. Now all the roles are changing now, you know, and he's quick to jump to solutions. And
Well, and I think the physician was just quick to solutions too. I mean, without, you know, being comfortable and giving you the time to have a conversation, ask, you know, any emotional feedback on how that felt. I mean, it just was not emotionally present at all. And so she just immediately jumped into action. We got to get you on palliative care. We got to get you some services. And what are we going to do? You know, and so that didn't feel good. You know, y'all familiar with palliative care, the term? So, and many great things, you know, and that's focusing on, you know, quality and support. And, you know, there, you can sit down and have an entire discussion with professionals about palliative care and options and treatment and whether you want to pursue treatment and what's this going to look like and what's important to you. I mean, that entire event, you know, was mishandled, but.
Right, and even that physician had the best intentions. He was giving his best advice in that situation, but it wasn't necessarily the best thing for Howard. That's not necessarily what Howard was wanting to do.
Plus, just this last year, my sister passed from ovarian cancer. And she was going to Texas Oncology for four plus years. And when it came time to where she just didn't want chemo anymore, there was the option, do you want hospice, do you want palliative, do you want, and I feel it's a broken system because you can't get everything you want. For example, she had infusions that would give her energy and keep her going and help feed her because she had, you know, with ovarian, the cancer was growing in the stomach area and putting pressure on her intestines. So toward the end, we really weren't given the correct information. We were told, oh, we're gonna make you really comfortable at home. We're gonna bring in all this help and you're going to have all this support. But what we realized is the infusions stop. Here's a bunch of drugs. Here's some equipment. They're going to come around once in a while. And I was with her the day she passed. So I don't have to get too much in the weeds on this. And it was very terrible. It was very volatile because all this help that we were told she would have, she didn't have. So I think there really is a problem when we say we've got these options. We really need to understand, maybe it's just the state of Texas, other states, but what really do people get and what they're told they're going to get and what family members are faced with. So I think there needs to be a major education on what all these are about when we're facing palliative and hospice care. What are you going to lose? What's it going to look like? One last point, one of the drugs was morphine. My sister was petrified of morphine. She's like, please don't give me morphine. We didn't realize that morphine was going to help her to be more peaceful, to be more calm. So she went out really violently because I honored her and didn't give her morphine, which was just a terrible thing not to do because I didn't know. So I really think we need, and I hope we cover this, is what are some options? How can we educate ourselves? How can we as caregivers for our family do the best we know how to for people transitioning? And I just don't think we're here on that yet.
Yes.
And I think
Go ahead.
And I think what we're watching through all this is the option that nobody will talk about is this.
Mm-hmm.
The doctor can, and part of the reason is it's illegal. You just can't do it. Well, in Oregon you can't. But I mean, so the education, Andy, is that is what you're doing, what you're trying to do here. And say, look, let's look at all the options. And people have, and after I went through all of this with the podcast, and people say, well, what if kick the bucket? What do you kick the bucket? And I said, just think about it. If you really did not want to stay in this reality, what would you do? And when it turns around and you ask somebody that, rather than saying, here's what they need to do, you just ask them, what would you do? And then don't say anything because then they have to say, okay, well, maybe, I don't know, or wait.
And I think absolutely, I'm commenting on what both of you are saying. I mean, that education piece, I mean, that's power. When you have that knowledge, you're getting that sense of control back. I mean, that's where a lot of this fear comes from, this uncertainty. And so, having options and then being able to pick an option that fits what's right for you is very important. And even in an example of like this podcast, this may be the only option Howard thinks exists. So this is the one he's going to choose because he wants to have that sense of control. But what we've kind of done with medicine around end of life is that we've kind of normalized and we've kind of like naturalized things that aren't natural. And so it's like we've come in with these medical interventions and we think that's normal to do at end of life when really it's not. And we're kind of making something that isn't normal look natural, where dying can be natural. And so understanding your options. I mean, for example, when your body is shutting down, you're naturally not going to be hungry. But you often hear in memory units, family members being told, mom's not really eating much lately. And then they go, okay, well, we can give her a appetite stimulant. And it's like, so we intervene with this medical intervention and we think that that's normal and that's natural. And it's not. Her body, she's not hungry because her body is preparing to let go and move on. But then we intervene. And so it's like realizing that you have so many options to let nature, take its course without jumping to an extreme. Possibly this may seem extreme for some it is perfectly the right fit, but even like not deciding to change the content of your food. We'll have people in memory units go from a regular diet to puree because they're not swallowing well. That's a medical intervention because they're trying to avoid aspiration or getting pneumonia. Then they'll give you an antibiotic for the pneumonia. And it just becomes intervention after intervention. And then you feel like when you say stop, like you're making that decision when your body's already making that decision. But we don't know this because we're not being educated. We've had a time when someone was at end of life and they were on a feeding tube. And it was because their body couldn't handle it anymore. And so family didn't know and they thought the right thing to do was be on a feeding tube. But as you start to actively pass away, your body shuts down. It's not digesting. It's not able to eliminate waste. That feeding tube is extremely painful. So you thought you're doing the right thing, but you're in fact, because of that interference and that medical intervention, it's causing more complications. And people just don't know. So when we educate, and we've been there, where we're like, you're not taking food away from mom or dad or your loved one. You're doing what their body naturally wants. This intervention is not the right thing. And so it's just education. You're right. When you don't have that education, you just don't know and you feel like you're in the dark. And then you don't have that sense of competence. You don't feel like you're in control and that well-being is gone. You don't feel satisfied with your decisions. And those three things are so important. That's quality of life. Sense of control, well-being, and competence. And
there's an ethics because there's lots of hospice cares competing for us to use them. So I did my due diligence. I'm a PhD psychologist. I'm a pretty smart gal that I go out and research and what was the best thing for her. And we really, looked at who has good ratings and talked to doctors and everything and used a group that made a bunch of promises they could not keep, nor did they tell us this. And so my sister was supposed to have months and she had, a couple weeks. And we would have just done things so differently had we known her body was shutting down. And they weren't telling us till the day it happened. So I just think there's a big ethical issue about this whole profession.
there's lots of assumptions. Go back to those assumptions.
There were a couple of times, I think you mentioned grief. You all brought up grief before, and I just want to throw this out, thinking of education. When I was 5, we lived with my grandmother in a fairly large home in Houston, and she had a cousin, an older man. His name, they call him Will. We all said Uncle Will. I'm 5, and we all said Uncle Will. Okay. Well, he had a room kind of off away from everybody. We never saw too much of him. Well, it came time for he was jaundiced so badly that he was on the way out. And so the point I'm going to bring through is in our family, when somebody goes to that point, every child comes and sits in the room and watches while this person goes. And later on, especially when I was going through this, I got to think, wow, how fortunate I was to have that, at a 5-year-old to watch that there was this, it was so easy for him to just be gone. But now that, I know that's not how everybody did, I'm not saying that's, but that's what happened. And so, but to put all of that kind of thing in on it, to help people understand what this is really all about, what life and the beginning and ending and all that sort of things like for a child, and then to have the child grow up and be able to do it. You know what I'm saying?
We refer it to as a legacy of a good death, because you know, when you, like you said, you've experienced trauma, and that's going to stay with you forever. You know, and then when I have elder relatives that have been present with it, and we've been present, and you normalize what a healthy end of life process is. You're right, the children, and it goes on, and that has a legacy, and so it is really important. But you know, we've medicinized death and end of life, you know, to such a degree that it doesn't happen in the home anymore, you know, and so, you know.
There's a great quote, I don't know if you've heard of Anthony Valendez. We have the book over there called Conversations, but he says what people need most on this journey is not the promise of a next new technology, but rather a guide to help them navigate this dark forest in which they will undoubtedly find themselves. And it is that guide. And that, I think that's what ultimately, you know, inspired us, that we are, you know, we want to be that guide for people. Because a lot of people just don't know what their options are. They don't feel well informed. There's lots of gaps that people fall into. That's where the suffering and pain come from, the gaps. You know, and if we could fill those gaps, you know, and be there to help, you know, plan those next steps, educate, put the systems in place so that if your choice is to age in place and remain at home, that's what you can do.
Well, and even in Dolores's, you know, situation, she, you know, advanced directives are so important so that your, you know, children or your whoever is your power of attorney, you know, can help make those decisions. But with the progressive neurological disease such as Alzheimer's, you can have addendums to your advanced directives, and there's specific ones, and you can say, you know, if I am in this mild stage, you know, I do want to go to the hospital and be treated for pneumonia or that frequent UTI. But if it's more moderate, you know, and I know that going to the hospital would be traumatic, and I would have to be put in restraints, and I know I would decline. Don't give me those antibiotics. Don't treat me for that UTI. You know, and let me just, my body naturally do what it needs to do. But if you've had those conversations and signed off on that before while you still have your faculty, then, you know, it takes the pressure off your kids for trying to make a decision and know what to do. And then they don't feel like I'm, you know, giving up on my mom. She made this decision. She knew what the trajectory of this disease looked like. And once she didn't know anybody and she knew what her quality of life was like, she let you know, like, don't intervene.
I think it's interesting that what I'm hearing is do not resuscitate. And I just thought about, do not resuscitate. Wait a minute. You can't go. It's illegal for you to actually go.
Right.
So, but it's okay for you to say, I don't want to.
Right.
In Texas.
In Texas, yeah, in Texas. So talk about a disjointed philosophy there.
Right. And the nice thing is that this podcast series will continue to touch on these topics as we go along, and there's a lot of humor thrown in and some challenging situations, and so I think that's our intent, is just to continue to have this and expose you guys to some you know, some more concepts and
For the Alzheimer's, don't the directives have to be done before they're diagnosed with Alzheimer's? Or
as long
otherwise
as
they
they're
can come
still cognitively
back?
intact.
Okay, so they can't come back and go, oh no, you weren't in the right mind when you said you wanted to be.
Right. I mean, as long as you have capacity and you're still
Yeah,
Okay, I
present.
thought it had to be before the diagnosis. Okay,
As long as there's
okay,
stages.
okay.
Sadly, we have to start wrapping up. So I want to thank both Melissa and Michelle for being here. They are going to be on the live stream tomorrow if you want to hear more of the conversation continue. So thank you.